All right, but real quick, so the Veterans and Heroes to Agriculture program, we recently became Veterans and Heroes from the Veterans and Warriors to Agriculture, but now we include both veterans and first responders, which includes firefighters, emergency services personnel, law enforcement, sheriffs, etc. So if you or anybody you know is interested in learning more, just contact us here at the West Virginia Department of Agriculture. There's our contact information in the bottom right, 304-558-2210, or email at vetstoag@wvda.us. All right, our planning coordinators. So at the Department of Agriculture, we have planning coordinators embedded around the state. There are boots on the ground, and they're there to help support farmers both with technical assistance with things like production planning and finding new markets for their products, as well as finding local contacts and navigating some of those resources. Right now we've got 4 planning coordinators. So we've got Kacey Gantzer. She's up in the northern panhandle there, covers Hancock down to Pleasance. We've got Lacey Davidson there. She covers the southwestern portion of the state from Mason down to McDowell. And then Ashley Amos, who's actually online here with us, she covers Nicholas down to Mercer and Wyoming over to Greenbrier and that kind of southeastern portion of the state. And then we've got Nathan Bergdoll, who covers the eastern panhandle up from Pendleton over there to Jefferson County. And if you happen to fall into some of these central counties there, don't feel like you don't have somebody there to assist you. While these areas highlighted here are kind of the focus areas, they all work together to cover down on these other counties in between. So if you fall into one of those places, just reach out to us, and we'll get you set up and try to help you out as best we can.
Program, because my mom frequently said that she wanted to be a master gardener, and that she was knowledgeable about gardening, and so I just went ahead and enrolled us in that program to take the classes a few years ago, and we had really enjoyed being master gardeners together. And then she has moved away since the pandemic started and is living in Kansas, so she's in a happy situation there. And I've continued with the Master Gardener program because I just really believe in what we're doing in our communities, the education, the outreach, and like what we're doing with the FFA. We're looking to work on a pond reclamation project at Woodruff. Can everybody see the compost title screen okay?
Yep, we got it, Joe.
Okay. Perfect. So this is composting. I've been composting for a really long time, and it's funny, I started off in Raleigh, North Carolina in a condo community and had a hidden composter, which then got some complaints, and that was in the early 1990s, which is probably dating myself. I was in graduate school at the time. So I'm real committed to waste, apparently, and the proper disposal of waste. So that's been kind of fun. It's a fun journey to be involved with. So again, why compost? We want to reduce waste, and you can see to the right the product, the tremendous product that we have. As potential homesteaders, one of the important things is that you don't need to buy fertilizer and soil amendments if you've got good compost. And around here, especially, Dane, you're probably familiar with this in Fayette County, people would sell their topsoil off, and so you had to rebuild the soil. We've had to do some of that at that public garden over there on Terry Avenue, and I can't remember the name of it. It'll come to me during the presentation, but she is building a garden. She's doing a really beautiful public garden that she brings school groups into, and but the topsoil is terrible. They just took a layer of the topsoil off and it went right to the clay. And so that was when, in helping her in volunteer hours at the Master Gardeners, it's just extraordinary to me how difficult it is to weed. And so we, one of the things that we work at is rebuilding soil health. And I was out at a friend's house in Lincoln County, and I can just tell by, you know, the invasives in his yard and the invasive plants in his yard and all of the things that are going on his land, that rebuilding his soil health will be a project of mine over the next few years. So you reduce composting, helps reduce the quantity of materials in your waste stream. You know, you pay less for your trash if you're having your trash hauled away, and it also creates a product for your garden or for your business if you're doing ag business. It's free fertilizer for your plants, and again, it reduces the need for chemical fertilizer, and it conserves natural resources. Ultimately, it preserves what was given to us. You know, if we're looking at the holistic point of view, one of the things that's really important to me is if we're looking at what was given to us, what was granted to us, that we take good care of what was granted to us. And so I really believe very strongly in that, and not taking, even, for instance, eggshells or coffee grounds and throwing them away. I just believe all that should go in the earth. A real simple way to start composting, if you're a little skeptical, if you're a little worried, you can compost for your houseplants. You just put eggshells and coffee grounds together and have those in your own container on the counter. They don't smell, they don't really do anything. And you can add that to your houseplant soil. It's really great for herbs. Some people even start their herbs in eggshells. Have an eggshell and put a little bit of soil in the eggshell, or a little bit of coffee ground in the eggshell, and give your seeds a start. So that is one way to do that. So composting takes a little work and planning. If you have space, if you have some acreage, it's really great to set up a larger composter and get that plan made. So we take our food scraps outside every day, put them in our compost, and then we take our leaves and put a layer of leaves in. And in the fall, it's a great time to put leaves in. If you still have leaves on the ground, that's actually a good bed over the winter. The leaves are a good bed over the winter for your ground to help protect it. And this would be a good time to now rake those and put those as a beginning layer for compost. And any plant material can go into your compost. However, you want to be careful with invasives, diseased plants, or allergens. So those are the three that you want to watch out for. Like pokeweed, you don't necessarily want to put pokeweed into your compost. If you can leave yourself a little pokeweed stand somewhere for the birds to enjoy, that's fine. Otherwise, you might just want to get rid of it, especially if you have little kids, because pokeweed is attractive and children will eat it, and it is dangerous to children. Be careful, or be thoughtful about putting dairy in your compost, or oils. For instance, if you have fried off bacon, and who doesn't love bacon, but if you fried off bacon and you have that grease, that's a good thing to kind of condense down into a suet block for your birds over the winter. Not necessarily a good thing to put in your compost pile unless you want to attract some of the more predatory animals. Raccoons will come after your compost that way. And bears, because of course meat grease will attract some of those meat-eating animals. Meats and citrus fruits. Citrus decomposes a little differently than kind of your standard fruits and vegetables. So for instance, you can throw a tomato in your compost and that'll be fine. You can throw a grapefruit peel in your compost over time, and if you've got a really healthy composter, it'll be okay. But if you really love citrus and you're eating a lot of citrus, I would encourage you to consider setting up a different compost pile just for citrus. Just because it tends to decompose a little bit differently. Do not add manure. I can't. You just can't be careful enough with manure. And I know that those of you that are in ag business are like, wait, what about composting manure? So because again, and I think you all probably know the term, manure can be a hot fertilizer. Like chicken manure can be really, really hot. That you you don't always want to put it into your compost. So for instance, when I set up my blueberries, I did a layer of manure, horse manure that I got from my sister-in-law, and then I put a layer of compost over that. And so those guys worked together to create a good foundation for the blueberries, but I don't leave it in the compost all the time. So when you're talking about the waste stream and what I'm doing with waste now, I've got 3 different piles. I'm in a city yard in Beckley, so I have to be careful about what all those piles look like. So I actually have some kind of homegrown compost piles in my yard, and they look like the manure. I don't have a ton of manure. I can get that quite easily from my sister-in-law anytime. So I don't really keep a whole lot of that around. Dog and cat manure can be, it's much more likely to have chemical products in it unless you've got your pets on a more holistic diet. Some of the stuff that we're feeding our pets are not really all that great for them. And then if your pets are on a lot of medication, because we love our animals, we love our family members, they might be on some medication. A friend of mine was just talking tonight about her diabetic dog, and it's taking insulin and it's doing a lot of that stuff. And we don't need a lot of that in our compost pile, because a lot of medication does come out of you as well. It just runs through your body. Your body takes what it needs and leaves the rest. So not a lot of dairy, especially creams. You can use whey. Whey should be okay. I make yogurt, and I'll usually take the whey off the yogurt and use that either in soups or in the compost, and that does all right. But you want to be careful with your dairy and how it works in the compost pile. So that's kind of some various thoughts about how you handle compost and what you're putting into your compost. Straw. Straw is great. Yard waste is great unless you're using a lot of chemicals on your yard. I don't know that anybody here necessarily would be doing that, because you might have a section of yard that you want pretty. That's going to be like your bowling green or your golf green. But I think most of us are pretty laid back about our yards, and so the less chemical additives you can put in your yard, the better off you are. And so if you have yard waste that has a lot of chemical additive, then you do want to be careful about putting that in your compost. All of that interferes with the biome, because you are creating a different kind of biome in your composter. So to cover a 30-foot by 30-foot garden with 1 inch of compost, you need about 2.8 cubic yards. And I am suspicious that I probably have that. I'm trying to think. My compost container is at least 8 feet by 4 feet and 2 feet high. It doesn't have a good containment as far as moisture goes right now. I need to pull everything out and make a better bottom for it. But what you do is you want to make sure you have a good ratio, and I'll talk about those ratios in just a minute, of brown yard waste, kitchen waste, and then water. Those are the 3 parts to your compost to really make it work well for you. And then you turn it. I'm a lazy composter. I'm working full time, and I love master gardeners, and I'm in a fellowship with WVU for math teachers. So I'm not a great active composter. But if you are, like if you're starting compost now and you want to use it, you're planning to use it in October as you overwinter, and you're setting up your garden for, say, the spring of 2022, then you're going to want to be turning your compost, and you're going to want a good pitchfork for that, and probably teenage boys. They're really helpful for turning compost. No offense, Dane. So. When you're looking at the compost equation, you're looking for organic waste, oxygen, water, bioorganisms, which will create carbon dioxide, water, plus heat, plus compost. So that's your kind of very layman's terms chemical equation. You want the waste, you want oxygen, which is what turning does. It helps oxygenate that pile, water, and bioorganisms. And I do put earthworms. I like to fish. We all do here. And so I put I put worms in the compost a couple of times a year, especially once I know we're past the danger of frost. You reduce your waste, and then this is the document from Governor Caperton, who was talking about composting about the same time that I was starting to compost, which I thought was really interesting. I used this document with the city of Beckley when there was some pushback with me about what my yard looked like, and so that was really helpful to have something that was nearly 20 years old to back up what I was doing with my yard. If you want to add nutrients and you want to fix some nutrients in your soil, think about some cover crops. And one of the ways that you would know, and I don't know if this has been discussed previously, is so I see your question, and I would say if you really want to speed up the process, once a week. If you are not an active composter, then once a month will be comfortable. When we're really wet, like we're really wet right now, this is a good time to turn your compost more often because it's really easy to get mold in it. So once a week is probably safe. And then if you're not an active composter, turning it once a month or a couple times a month is pretty comfortable. The way that you find out what your soil needs is you can do a soil sample and send it off to the labs at WVU, and they will tell you what kind of amendments you need for your soil, what your chemical composition is of your soil. And there's a document through the WVU website that you can use to send off your soil sample. And it's kind of, you take samples from around your yard, you poke holes, you let the dirt dry out, let your soil dry out, and then mix it and send them a specific sample with a form. And then they can tell you what your yard needs. And sometimes it doesn't necessarily need a compost pile. Sometimes you do need to make an amendment to get your soil more balanced and help the biome. I've found that over time, my yard is healthy enough now that I don't need to do a whole lot of amendment to grow roses, to grow blueberries, to grow elderberries, to grow blackberries, to grow ramps. The ramps are in a different portion of the yard than, say, the blueberries. And that's really all I have to do. When I first started on this property 7 years ago, that wasn't the case. I would have needed to do a soil test and send it off and say, okay, these are the amendments that I need to buy. And I'm still working hard on getting a good milkweed process going so that I can have good soil for that. So that portion of my yard isn't where I want it to be. Our soil in West Virginia is notoriously poor. Everywhere I go, I can see evidence of poor soil quality, poor tilth, and the compost just so improves it. So even if you aren't doing some planned planting, even if you're just living somewhere and you're fooling around and you just don't want to have as many bags of trash, then composting is going to help your soil. And you can do something real simple. You can just spread your compost out every fall and let it work down into the soil over the winter. And then, your grass is going to come up looking a little bit different and hopefully a little bit healthier in the spring. So I really believe composting is for everybody. I'm doing it in the middle of Beckley. I've had complaints about my yard, so I don't really feel like you should be uncomfortable composting. You can have a small composter in an apartment and then have somebody that you want to share your compost with. You can do eggshells and coffee grounds in an apartment. So when you're composting, you do want to select a site that gets some sun, and you don't want to just pick a place that's out of the way because you'll find it hard to compost. When we were living in Summers County, in the last place we lived in over there, our compost was probably a good 100 feet away from our back door. And so we just kept sending the kids. We had 4 kids in the house at the time, and we just kept sending them out there to compost. And I wasn't paying good attention to my composter out there. And you have to be careful about your sun. My yard is pretty shady, so my composter right now is in a lot of shade because I need to cut back the bamboo that's hanging over it. If you get too much sun, it'll dry out quickly. So like this setting here is not terrible in the picture. it won't, you have to be, like I said, you have to be careful. And part of that reason is because it has to get warm. Different temperatures do different things. So I don't know if you all are familiar with making yogurt or beer or kombucha or sauerkraut, but you do have to kind of watch your temperature, and it's good to have, and compost is the same way. It's a little temperature sensitive. So if you cook it, you get it too hot on the outside, it, yes, I absolutely, anybody who wants bamboo, just sign up. Just put your, oh my gosh. So it will, the compost itself internally needs to reach a certain temperature in order to be the most efficient compost. What happens if it doesn't reach that temperature is it grows a different kind of microorganism. And I don't know enough biology to tell you which specific microorganisms are happening at which temperature, but you will know, and you will be able to smell the difference in your compost. And if your compost has gotten too hot or too wet, it will not smell right, and it will not smell good. Your compost will eventually smell good because it will, oh my gosh, I'm getting chill bumps. It will smell amazing because it will smell like it's going to grow, and you will know the difference. It's not going to smell like manure anymore. It's just going to smell like good, rich, healthy soil. And once you get accustomed to that smell, there really is not a whole lot that's better. So you want good drainage. And so, for instance, in mine, I have really good drainage. For most households, 3 feet by 3 feet is good as far as the space that you need for your composter. Summers County was giving away little black composters that I call Daleks because they look like the Doctor Who monsters for years, and they ran out of them. And that was basically, it was basically an upside down trash can with some more aeration involved. You may need to add water from time to time. And if you're in the city like I am, camouflage or make something pretty out of your composter is not a terrible idea, especially if you're going to do any kind of backyard barbecue or anything. It's not the worst idea. And if you make it from cedar or something, then you know you've got actually a kind of a pretty composter. And I've got some more pictures coming up. So you select your site. You can place or create a container. There are places to buy composting containers. I've never really been satisfied with them, so I've made my own. We used a pallet and chicken wire one time, and the one I have now has chicken wire on the bottom, which is too much drainage. I need to slow down the drainage. And then I used the bamboo that Dane just offered. I used the bamboo around the sides and hooked it up that way. So you can also create a pile. You can create a brush pile, and Caperton's document supports keeping brush in your yard for wild habitat versus sending it to the landfill. And that was part of Caperton's work in the early 1990s with his colleagues, was that we were just sending too much brush to the landfill. So I have a brush pile in my yard, and that is perfectly legal based on the documentation from that time period. So you can take your leaves now, put them in a pile, and then start adding your kitchen waste. Being able to turn the compost is great. Like I've said, it helps it decompose more effectively because you're adding more oxygen into the pile for the microbes. Pitchforks are great. I can't begin to describe. You slice down and you turn, and you slice down and you turn. And some people have saved themselves the trouble of kind of doing the slice down and turn, and all they do is just flip it into the other bin. And so they have kind of a timed schedule of here's a bin that's empty and here's the bin that's full, and they just take their pitchfork and slide it into the empty bin, and then in a couple of weeks they slide it back into the empty bin. And that really gives the air into the compost. And turn frequently and initially just to get the process, the cycle going. And then the colder months, you may not need to be this active. If you're using the rapid method, you turn your pile every 3 days. I'm sorry about the page reference. That's the Master Gardener Manual. It revives your good microbes by adding oxygen to the compost equation that I initially said. On chilly fall mornings, which you would have some of this coming up in the spring, you should be able to see steam rising from your compost pile. If you have a really active, really happy compost pile, it's going to be warmer than the air around it. And freezing won't hurt it. It'll just come back in the spring. If turning isn't that exciting of an option, you can add some small French drains to the pile. Yes, you can use any kind of yard waste. You can add small French drains into the pile to aid in getting oxygen inside your compost heap. So, I don't know if you guys are familiar with French drains, but they're plastic pipes with holes in them. We use them to create a moat around our house, which is very handy this week because then we don't get water in our basement. And they're just so convenient because they just, here's your big piece of pipe with the holes in it, and you put that in your pile. And you put it under your pile, and then some air is circulating under your pile, so it's a really nice way to kind of lazy compost ultimately. Here's some different composters. Here's commercially available Compost Wizard from Sam's Club, yay raw, and obviously you can turn that. That's going to be a lot less compost than I make in a week probably. I'm a vegan, and almost everything I have is fruit and vegetable waste because let's face it, vegan nuts and berries. Here's homemade from the DIY network, and you can find lots of great ideas on Pinterest for like pallets. And you can see here on the right, here's this soil that's happening based on this compost that this person has turned. So that's just really beautiful. And this looks like it's mostly come from a pallet, and that's free. Woodrow was doing some remodeling, and there's some beautiful pallets out there, and boy, I took them. There's one in my bathroom now that I remodeled. All right, so this is one of the guys that looks like the Dalek, and you can see here's the bottom where you can turn it a little bit, and then there's the lid, and on this one you could turn the lid and close it down to make it warmer, or open the lid and make it cooler. The good guys in compost are nitrogen, carbon, water, air, and animal products can be a little bit sketchy. Avoid things that go rancid. So if it smells really bad, or if it's like a dip, like those dips that you can get for like the football game, which we've all been doing. We've got chips and dip for basketball here coming up pretty soon for March Madness. The chips could probably go in the compost. I wouldn't encourage you to put the dip in the compost unless you've made it yourself with some really fresh ingredients. And I had a really bad experience with some store-bought potato salad. I'm sorry about that because it's come up twice now. I have to eliminate that. All right, so this is what you're looking at as your ratio. I'm a math teacher, so this makes a lot of sense to me. It may not make as much sense to you. You want 1 part of the stuff on the left. You want a lot more of the stuff on the right. So you want a greater amount of leaves, straw, tree bark, and sawdust. And you can use like newspaper here, and you can use paper grocery bags here in the high carbon side. What you want to be careful of are the inks. There are more and more soy inks now, which are okay. But you want to be careful of some of the older colored inks. Like you don't necessarily want to put the glossy magazine in your compost pile. Take that and use that to remake paper, break it down and make your own paper. That's a really great use for glossy magazines. So on the left-hand side, your high nitrogen are vegetables, grass clippings, manure, poultry manure with litter in it. Again, so you're breaking up some of the hot nature of that fertilizer, and pig manure and coffee grounds. Those are going to be the guys that are your smaller ratio to the what we often call the brown content, which is the carbon-based content. That's probably pretty confusing. If you're a person who's familiar with technology, you might want to take a screenshot of this so that you can think about that ratio as you're getting ready to build your composter. So I'll give you a moment just to do that. Sawdust is great. I'm trying to think of what I've put. I've really put a lot of elderberry branches. Once you get your elderberries and your blackberries and you cut those guys back, and they're just sitting there basically not doing a whole lot. They haven't composted yet because I've got too much of them in my composter and not enough of the other good stuff to get them to compost down. And also, elderberries are a hard wood. So let me keep going. So this is your healthy ratios for the more Casual composter, green matter 2 parts, brown matter 1 part, so shredded woody material. If you chip the woody materials, and I have a mulcher, I haven't got it running yet, but I've got a mulcher in my backyard I've been tinkering with, that you can chip the woody materials to put into your composter, you're just gonna be cooking with gas. It's gonna be great. If you have houseplants that have got mites or aphids, do not put those in your compost. You've got a really great biome in your compost, and then you add bugs to it, and the bugs are so happy. They're going to be more and more and more. So your aphids or your mites or any of that are just going to go hog wild in your compost, and you ruined it. And you just have to start over again. You really kind of need to put it in trash bags. You might let it cook in the sun in a trash bag and see if it'll kill off that stuff. I haven't tried that. That probably would work, because I know that if you put trash bags in the sun with bed bugs, that the heat of the sun will kill bed bugs. So that might be something to consider. And do not compost invasive plants. Bamboo or mustard garlic, both of which I have in my yard, you don't want those to go into your composter unless you're using the bamboo as a construction material. I actually have left some of the bamboo around my composter, so they're like struts. So they're like the vertical braces for my composter, and they're just growing. They're real happy. And I realized I had a whole lot of mustard garlic in my yard this year, so I pulled at least 5 pounds of it and made pesto with it. So that was handy. It was something to learn about, using a plant, an invasive plant, for something that can nourish us. And so I have mustard garlic pesto that has this really kind of nice tang and taste of summer. And so that's been super handy to have. So on the moisture on your compost, and I know this isn't true of mine at the moment, if you grab a handful, you take your hand and put it in that compost and squeeze it. And if you can get some water out of it, then you're in pretty good shape. If it's pouring the water when you squeeze it, then you've got compost tea. You can take it all out and squeeze it. Again, this will be kind of fun to have your kids do. My child would kill me. You take all your compost and squeeze it out into like a 5-gallon bucket, and then pour that compost tea over your garden, especially if you've got plants starting, or over the plants that you're starting for the spring. And then then it'll get the ratios will get back down to where they need to be. Let me go. All right, so
Joe's got a quick question there from Mary, just kind of on the topic of what you shouldn't put in there. She's asking if wood chips from tree branches that they've been shredding from cutting overhead trees along electrical wires, is there anything you should be concerned about there, as far as she put specifically bugs, rot, lichen, and may even be, I guess, probably worthwhile to cover the species that are allelopathic and stuff, if you want.
And so that's a really good question. For the most part, your compost is going to be hot enough by May that you're not going to have to worry too much about the diseases. The only thing that you would want to watch is if you're seeing folks cutting the branches back, and that you've got a diseased limb or something coming in, I just wouldn't add it. I chop it up, use it for firewood, or use it in your barbecue pit or whatever. I don't think I would use it in the composter, but I think the chips are a really great foundation for your compost pile. And if you have a way of, like if somebody else is doing the work and you can ask them to keep that separate, then you're in good shape. But for the most part, if you've got a good compost pile, it can get hot enough to sterilize most of the bad influences. Like aphids and mites, they're gonna go hog wild in there. And so what you want to do is kind of get it hot. 200 degrees is a number that we look at for sterilizing soil in the oven. I don't know if that's enough to get rid of some of the more negative influences and some of the negative bugs. But But then once you've got your soil or your compost pile, and you could just put a candy thermometer in there to see, or even an oven thermometer to see if your pile is getting to the temperature you want. But 200 degrees is a safe number for sterilizing the pile. And then once you've hit that 200 degree mark, then you can let it cool back down and start pulling in some of the more beneficial microbes. I think if I were really worried about infection or infestation, and then I would definitely tighten down my tarp on my composter, make sure I'm hitting that optimum number for a while, and then let it loose and put earthworms in it. Let it turn back into a compost, add water and earthworms, and turn it pretty regularly, probably a couple times a week, in order for it to really get back to a more healthy biome. So that's what I know. Again, I don't know enough about the negative influences to know whether or not 200 degrees is the perfect number. I could certainly message Dr. Danilovich and ask her if she knows, because she's the expert for master gardeners that we refer to. If you all want me to do that, Dane, if you send me a follow-up email, I'll be happy to do that.
Sure.
So the Y condition should be optimum. We're looking at avoiding aerobic. We're looking at avoiding anaerobic bacteria. We want aerobic bacteria because aerobic are the oxygen guys. And so we increase the oxygen levels in the compost. And again, you can smell the difference. And different temperatures support different types of aerobic bacteria. The same thing is true for like your sauerkraut. If you let your sauerkraut sit for 7 days, it's going to have a different bacteria composition than if it sits for 21 days. Anaerobic bacteria will help compost. They will work, but they're more like fermentation. So you have to be careful of your oxygen levels. And you're getting kind of a different balance and a different pH and a different chemical makeup. So fungi are great. We like our fungi. Most of us, I'm sure, are mushroom hunters. But we have to be careful about what we're bringing into our pile. And you can see that I'm going to make a note. There's a picture of a healthy biome, and I'm not sure I have it in my presentation of what it should look like. There's if your soil just has grass in it and it's just doing like one breed of grass, you're just not getting the healthy biome in your ground that you need to really do some biodiversity. And when you're farming, especially for your personal use, your family use, you want some biodiversity and a healthy biome. And then if you're farming for ag business, which is great, then you still want to cultivate that healthy biome, and that means that you want some crop diversity and some diversity that would come from your compost. So you can see these are helpers, and then again, most of us with master gardeners are doing everything we can to create that healthy biome to help us avoid spraying, so that we are not harming the beneficial bugs. So I'm not getting your whole message. So do you all want to follow up about the tree? What's going on with the trees?
Oh, yeah, sorry. I was just adding in there. There are some species of trees, they're referred to as allelopathic. They produce chemicals that inhibit plant growth. So, black walnut is one of the chief species around West Virginia that's pretty common that does that. There are several others, but I just made the note that I'm not sure exactly what the heat has, what the impact is on the chemical structure of that. But if you know that, all your wood chips are coming from, mainly black walnut or something, you may want to avoid using them as a mulch or adding them into your compost. If it's just a small, if it's diversified wood chips or something like that, and black walnuts maybe just a small percentage, it probably doesn't really make a difference. But I wouldn't use 100% black walnut probably to add to your garden.
That's a really great point. We in the homeopathic community, black walnut is hugely popular. I actually have one in my yard, and it doesn't make any difference because it's just the influence is so small, like you said. And so, but yeah, you're absolutely right. And I hadn't made that connection between allelopathic and black walnut because I haven't talked about this for a while, which is my fault. But we take black walnut husks and the bark and make a tincture out of it, and people covet that, especially because it's organic. So so I was trying to see if I could set that up, and so we just put it in a gallon, take the husks, and make a tincture, and people really like. I can't give it away fast enough. It just goes. So it's fairly interesting. It's a good point. And so that making that tincture keeps them out of the compost, because by the time I've finished making that, by the time that's finished creating that solution, there's no harm in it for the compost at that point. So anyway, that's a good point. So how to compost, you want amendments and care. And like you can see, this pile has the steam rising from it. So do you have manure available? Are you already using it? There's some very specific rules. And that's why I've got this link here about if you are reselling product. There are some very specific rules, and with the legislature in session, this may have changed, about how to use manure in your compost if you are reselling your product to the public. So I've used manure in the past. I don't have a problem using it, but I'm not selling anything that has been affected by manure. So that's it. And I would encourage you, if you're doing for home cultivation, get it, deep in the ground and put your plants on it and wait and be happy. We had a garden, an herb garden over our septic tank in Summers County, and we were a little intimidated by our plants at that point. They were very, very happy, and we thought we're just going to leave them there and let them be happy. We're not gonna eat anything from under the ground at that spot in the garden. One of the things that people make is a compost tea. And so there's two types of compost tea. You take a shovelful of your compost. So this is super easy. Put it in a 5-gallon bucket. I know there's one, there's plenty of them laying along the side of the road, unfortunately. 1 to 4. So 1 shovelful of compost, or basically a gallon of compost to 4 gallons of water. Cover it with water for a couple of days, and you can use your tap water for this. And the reason why you want to let it cover for a couple of days is to let the water gas off and let the chlorine gas off out of the water. And then you can spray that onto your plants for a source of diluted nutrients. And then there's actively aerated compost tea, AACT, and that's a little bit more specific. It does help improve your biome, and I think I have the directions on how to make that on the next slide. So you can buy kits for your AACT, 5-gallon bucket. You have an aquarium pump, so what you're doing is pumping air into it. You plastic tubing. This is like the end-all be-all of hydroponics with your compost. You want to do unchlorinated water here, just because the chlorine does the same thing to microorganisms that it does to the water. It's not that great for your microorganisms or your microbes. Stir the tea over 2 to 3 days, at least once a day. Add a few tablespoons of a simple sugar so that there's something for your microbes to eat, just like if you were making bread. The yeast needs some molasses or some sugar to eat. And then once you've added that sugar, you want to be careful about it. You're considering pasteurized versus unpasteurized, like if you're giving it honey, because it could mold. And then there are people who add alfalfa or seaweed, again, to really pump up the nutrient value of your AACT. So you can see that there's a lot of potential amendments here. It just depends on what you want to get out of your garden, and you want to be careful, like, oh, I'm going to add a cup of seaweed powder. That's good. And I'm going to add 4 cups of seaweed powder because that's even better. And you're going to wind up burning up your roots because you've just done too much. The enthusiasm with plants are a little bit more delicate than we realize unless they're well established. So being overly enthusiastic with something like seaweed powder is not going to be great for your plants. They will react poorly to that. All right, so moments in care, you're going to turn occasionally or more frequently, depending on how assertive and how excited you are about your compost. Once you get started, once a week is probably safe until you get a good feel for it. It adds oxygen for your aerobic bacteria, and just like the folks that were doing aerobics on the TV in the 1980s, it pumps them up, makes them great. And as your yard gets healthier, as your space gets healthier and you create a better biome, you will not need as many pesticides. You're just going to be bringing in the good stuff. And as you bring in the good stuff, it's going to attract more good stuff and grow more good stuff. And I'm a huge fan of, especially those of us that are higher up on the water table, the less pesticides we can use, the better off we all are. I've never added water to my compost because, again, I think you've probably figured out at this point, I'm a fairly lazy composter, but you've got to be careful in hot summers. So you might want to grab the hose in late July, early August and give your compost a bath just because it can get hot and dry. This is from a couple of summers ago. The summer was wet and I really did not need to add water at all to the compost. The way I've got my compost set up now, it dries out a lot more quickly, so I do need to add water to it. So there's that. How to use it. My experience is for planting in the spring, I really think you should add the compost in the fall in your holes. And then if you have really good compost, like that beautiful compost on the right-hand side of the picture from the DIY Network composter, then you can definitely add compost in the spring. I always add it down at the bottom. If I'm doing it in the spring, then what I'm going to do is put a layer of soil probably over the compost so that it doesn't just burn up the roots. When I planted in the fall, so I planted clethra in the fall, and they were on really fresh compost, and they were not as successful as a 50% success rate, as you can see. And then when I put the compost in the holes in the fall and planted in the spring, the plants were more successful. And what had happened was the nutrients had kind of filtered into the soil a lot more effectively because they'd been given time. And so I had grapes that I had planted there, which my child then burnt up with clove oil. So that was really great. It was an investment gone awry, but I have more grapes, so that's a good thing. We have Riverside grapes, which I'd never heard of. I haven't done it. So Marsha, I appreciate your question. I haven't done trench composting. Are you talking about doing the trenches beside the plants so that you've got a little bit of space away from the plants and then you trench around them? Because I think that would be a really great way to get the nutrients into the soil without them really going right up against the roots, if that's what you're asking. And this is like corn. If you are planting corn, which is, a favorite crop, my gosh, who doesn't love fresh corn? Then you can, and you're going to place the compost around the mounds. And this is a really great way for those nutrients to go into the corn. If it's working for you, Marsha, as far as is that you've trenched around your plants, I think that's really great. It's going to work well for some plants and not as well for others. So you're going to mulch it with nutrients again so that the rain seeps it into the ground. So, we're getting ready to enter our rainy season, which I know doesn't sound really good because we've all kind of been dealing with water this past weekend, but we're getting ready to enter what is a more wet season, and then it'll be dry come June or July. So the last thing you want to do is throw some compost onto your plants, say in June. It just is not a real effective way to compost. Now is a good time. Around the vernal equinox is a really good time. And then around the autumnal or later than the autumnal equinox, to put it underground to let it get into your biome. And a common mistake, we see this all the time, is to make your compost or your mulch too thick around the plant. And I don't know if you all have ever seen this in your yard, but you'll be like, I mulched it and then I mulched it again. And eventually you're getting to 2 inches or more. And what happens is the stem of your plant will start to rot because it can't get dry. It can't get air and it can't get dry. And so your plant is not as successful. So you want to be careful. You know, if you're really kind of feeling like you don't have enough compost right now, a 1/4 inch everywhere is great, especially right now with the rain that we're having, unless you're too low and it washes off. But real thick mulch or real thick compost will hold water to the plant and it'll mess with the stem and the growth. So just be really careful about the thickness and how much you're layering. And again, this is an enthusiasm issue. You know, I know that this works. I know this is a really good amendment for my plants. And yeah, I'm really happy. And so I'm going to give it more. And just like too much seaweed in your compost tea is too much, you know, 4 cups of seaweed versus 1 cup. This is the same thing is true for mulch. So that's really, really a great recommendation to trench around the tomatoes. Again, give them plenty of space. Do not shove your compost right up against the tomato stems because we all know how fragile tomatoes can be. Once they get a bad attitude, man, you're done. So this comment, your compost is now cooler and drier than when it is actively decomposing. That's some of you may have that right now if you have a compost bin, but this is probably from November time. So this was very specific recommendations about what you could do to till in compost. You can incorporate 25 to 50 bushels per 1,000 square feet, creating a surface of 6 to 8 inches mixed into the topsoil in a good garden space. And that would be something that I would do in the fall. You want to be careful about your nitrogen. If you do too much compost too quickly, it will use nitrogen in the soil. And you know, we have some plants that really love nitrogen out there. So you want to be careful. If you're doing 100 pounds of compost, adding about a cup of nitrogen, so you could conceivably just sprinkle that over the top right now before the rain, and it'll be helpful, really helpful for your plants. So you can use it for coarse organic mulch. So right now I have some really like partially decomposed compost to help reduce runoff, to decrease water evaporation. So that would be almost like a mulch around my roses, which currently have enough mulch around them, and they're plenty wet enough. But if it were August and I felt like, you know, the forecast is for 95 degrees for a week, which has definitely happened here, then I might want to add a layer of mulch or compost around the roses just to help them not get burnt up. And that's the kind of thing that I like to watch out for. So keeping soil cooler in summer and help regulating the temperature in winter helps reduce heaving. And we all know what a pain heaving can be. You know, it's not the end of the world, but it is kind of a pain in the rear to deal with. And then the compost, of course, will help control weeds. The healthier your compost is, the more likely it is to help you control weeds. And so, for instance, in my garden, I don't need to do a whole lot of weeding, which drives people crazy because they just don't understand why I'm not out there every day weeding stuff out. For the most part of my yard, the invasives that float in on the wind or get tracked in by the strays in the neighborhood don't really take root in my yard just because it's so healthy and it has so many native plants in it. Now the next door yard, the one that I'm trying to purchase, is full of mustard garlic and it's full of invasives. So I know that I can spread the love from my yard over there and really, really help start growing a more healthy biome, even within 10 feet of my yard. All right, so we've got some pictures, you know, how to use compost, and here's that the left picture could basically be mostly compost. This is from the Middle East, and they're actually making bricks out of compost for their home. So they're firing it. Just like you would do, I don't know if you know this, they take an organic substance in Scotland and Ireland and northern parts of the country where there's not a lot of wood. You know, they're getting higher up, and so there's not a lot of wood to burn, and they burn stuff off the heath. And I don't remember exactly what that's called. So if you all are more familiar with that Northern European behavior, I'll stop talking about it. But you can take, compost and fire it, good compost, right moisture content, and fire it and make bricks out of it as well. So again, you can use it in your house pellets as long as you pasteurize it. My experience has been 200 degrees is enough. I feel like I've been talking for a long time. I have. I'm really sorry about that. It's a great way to handle waste from your home. Biggest influence in my home was food waste. We're 1 bag of trash a week. And right now we're down to 1 bag of trash every 2 or 3 weeks because I recycle and I compost. And so very little of my waste needs to actually go out to the curb or to the landfill. And, I know a lot more about composting than I used to, just because I know more about ratios and about keeping it wet and about turning it. If you really want to dig deep into this, look into permaculture and follow Bill Mollison. He is the permaculture expert. He is a real guru, and I'm just completely fascinated. I don't think I can get away with creating permaculture in my yard here in Beckley unless I was super secretive. But it's a great way. It's a great opportunity to compost, and it's a really cheap way to feed your garden, and it ultimately keeps your waste out of the trash stream. And then what you do or your level of organic aspirations depends on your comfort zone. Obviously, not everybody's comfortable with handling manure for their garden. And if you're trying to sell, if you're any kind of resell, you want to double check what the regulations are for West Virginia. You have a link to that legislation, and that link should be the updated link. And so this guy here is my compost heap. You can see here's some happy dandelions. It's all made from bamboo. Here is my happy bamboo plot. This is in the early summer because I can see light in the back. I currently cannot see light through my bamboo stand. And I really try to use one side, but I have so much compost that I use both sides, and then I don't turn it as much as I should. This would be much more effective if there were not chicken wire on the bottom. If I had put even plywood on the bottom just to help hold in the moisture better. And then of course there's my ratty old wheelbarrow, and there's a manure container right there off to the right. And you can see I've been using bamboo as part of my fencing structure over here to the right. I want to dig all that out and put apple trees in, and I suspect they will be very happy apple trees because they will be close enough to this compost. So that is my presentation. I'm sorry I obviously went well over time. But I'm happy to answer more questions. I really like the suggestions about the trench composting. I haven't done that just because I haven't necessarily gardened professionally. So I'm an enthusiastic hobbyist. So, critters in the compost. Oh, thank you. Thank you for the positive comments. So Matthew, you asked about critters in the compost. I don't really have a problem, but I'm in the city. I don't think a tumbler would be a great idea. You may want to, I'm trying to think. There's specific things that bears are going to come to and things that they're not. Now, if they're hungry, they're going to come to everything, right? Because they're omnivorous if they're hungry. But otherwise, you might want to think about the eggshells and the fruits and maybe have those separate so that, you just have those in a 5-gallon bucket and the bear can pick through it. And you don't have to fight. You're just settling the argument before it even happens. But yeah, I absolutely agree that a bear would get into a tumbler. It just, it's just a puzzle to solve. It's not a challenge. So, but thank you. That's a good question because that made me think a little bit.
I like that. Any more questions for Joe? That was a great presentation.
Thank you. You guys are really knowledgeable. It makes me better too. That's great.
Yeah, one of the things, if any of you are like me, I used to be very intimidated about composting, and then, listening to Joe's presentation last year, it's not as bad as it looks. She does a great job of including the science and all your ratios and everything, but, it helps you kind of see that it's not as bad as it seems. So hopefully you all can get started if you're not already. Like she said, reduce some of your waste, and it makes a great amendment for the garden. You can use it for a lot of things. So
Absolutely.
yeah. And oh, sorry, go ahead.
Thanks for this opportunity. It's nice to kind of get my head back in the game,
Sure thing. Yeah. Well, thanks for doing it. I see some people want the slides in here. If you wouldn't mind, or I'll just go ahead and put my email in here. So I'm going to put my email in the chat. If you could shoot me an email, I'll make sure we get the slides out to you.
You may have to request permission since it's going through a couple of accounts. So just if it doesn't open right away for you, just request permission, and then I'll grant permission tomorrow. It's no big deal. I just need to have the request.
Sounds good. And like I mentioned earlier, this was recorded, so we're going to put it on our YouTube page, West Virginia Department of Agriculture. So you can search out on YouTube, or if you scroll up in the chat a little ways there, Beth actually shared the link for us. So that should be up within the next 24, at most 48 hours. But yeah, if you got any questions, give you one last chance here. But otherwise, we'll kind of wrap things up. Thanks again, everybody, for being here. Hopefully the Mountaineers won. I haven't seen, but yeah.
I haven't looked either.
Yeah. All right. Well, there are going to be more presentations coming up. So I'm trying to remember. I think our next one is in 2 weeks. So that'll be the 16th, right? Yeah. And we're going, or 14th. 16th, I'm sorry. Yeah. And we're going to be covering an introduction to beekeeping is the plan. So it'll be the same time, same place, same link you use, but we'll send out a new flyer. Keep an eye out for that. But we're planning to do several more of these throughout the rest of the end of the winter here in spring. So covering a lot of good topics. And flyers, you can find those if you're on social media. You can follow the West Virginia Department of Agriculture on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. We share them through there, and we can also, let's see, we also send them out through the West Virginia Department of Agriculture's e-news. So, if you're wanting to receive that, let me know and get you added onto the list there, so you receive our e-news that comes out at least once a month. Sometimes they send out updates throughout the month when there's different trainings and things, like homesteading. So those are a couple ways there. Good deal. Well, I guess we'll go ahead and wrap it up here. Yeah. Thanks again, everybody. We'll see you hopefully here in a couple weeks. Yeah, hopefully get some of you back on here. Thanks, Joe. Take care.